started, why don't I ask my fellow panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the discussion.
I think you can hear me. I am Vani Kola. I run a venture capital fund based in Bangalore. We generally are a Series A, Series B, kind of a very early stage investor. We invest in primarily technology-led companies focused on the broader India problem. And in 2006, I moved back to India to start this because I saw a huge future for Indian entrepreneurs to focus on solving many of the difficult challenges that I think can be overcome by applying technology. And since then, the Indian entrepreneurial has gained a lot of vibrancy to the point that if you open a newspaper any day, I think somewhere in the first or the second or the third or every one of those pages, there'll be funding news. And I think this is only unique to India, that so much of our mind share goes into funding, and in fact it should go into company building. Funding is only a very, very small portion of what defines success for a business, and hopefully we'll talk about that.
Hi, I'm Lavanya. So I'm Vice Chairperson of the Nalli Group of Companies. And for those of you who don't know, it's the business is in saris, which is what I and I think some of us here are wearing. But it's a national chain in women's ethnic wear. We're probably, I think, the only chain in saris which actually has a nationwide presence and presence abroad. It's been a very strange journey for us, but we've endured for 89 years now. So I'm the 5th generation. It's a family-run business, and we've successfully navigated, I'd like to think, the typical hurdles that stop a regional player from actually turning into a national player. And yeah, I've been in the family business. I've spent some time abroad. I spent about 7 years away from the business, working in different positions, and then I've come back into the fold. So that's given me a kind of a unique perspective, and happy to sort of share my experiences to the extent that you all find any of these topics interesting.
Alison?
Hi, Ali Byrne. I run an organization called Village Capital, and we find, train, and invest in early-stage entrepreneurs who are expanding access to economic opportunity and solving problems in environmental sustainability. We do that here in India, as well as in Sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the US. And we're particularly interested in finding companies who are founded by overlooked entrepreneurs. So in the US, most 76% of venture capital goes to just 3 states, and that's 50% of venture capital worldwide: California, New York, and Massachusetts. 90% of venture capital goes to men, and only a very small percentage goes to minority founders. So we're particularly interested in finding entrepreneurs who have great ideas but are currently not being serviced by the existing venture capital ecosystem. If what I just said at the beginning about what we do sounded like a lot of jargon, the short version is we're an accelerator with a fund. And our accelerator focuses specifically on helping companies become investment ready and really understanding what milestones they need to reach in order to achieve sort of the next stage of funding. So we're also particularly interested in that as an area of focus for helping entrepreneurs get past the missing middle, which we'll talk about a little more.
So there's a lot of experience and a lot of expertise in this panel, and hopefully we'll get into some of those discussions. But this problem, you see, of entrepreneurs finding the first round of funding and then getting stalled is a pretty universal problem. And first round of funding is typically based on entrepreneurs' vision and charm and persuasiveness, all of those kind of things. And no one understands this better than Silicon Valley. I'm based in Silicon Valley, and I'll tell you two stories of 2 companies. One, I guess you might have heard recently, but there was a company that raised $10 million in Silicon Valley. And the company was called Yo, Y-O. And their basic premise was that sometimes you don't need 140 characters that Twitter has. Sometimes 2 characters are enough, and those 2 characters are YO, yo. And they raised $10 million. If you have not heard about it, that's for good reason. They could never get any more funding after that. There's another case which is sort of unfolding right now. The company's name is called Juicero, and they make $400 juicing machines. And it turned out that all said and done, the packet that they send for fruit, this thing, juice, you could squeeze it as good, almost as good with your fingers as with that $400 machine. So, needless to say, they will also not get the next round of funding. But beyond that, beyond these kind of, Silicon Valley funds a lot of crazy ideas, right? I mean, if they didn't, you would not get Twitter, and you would not get Facebook, and you would not get Apple, and all of those kind of things. So Silicon Valley does fund, really out of the way kind of ideas. But this problem of getting stuck, after the first round of funding is pretty universal. And I think let's just hear from the panelists why that's the case, and what kind of situations have they seen where entrepreneurs have been able to get the first round of funding, but then after that have struggled. So Vani?
You're a very successful entrepreneur, so you know, and of course now you're also on the other side of the table. But there are so many reasons we all know that for why after a certain point you could get stuck. It could be not just at Series A. After Series A you could get stuck after Series D or something like that. Fab.com. I mean, you remember $1 billion and then went down to nothing almost overnight. And so I want to take a more broader perspective to what is the role of capital in the company building process, and in that context, really, what is the role of the CEO? And I think financial solvency of one's business is a very, very important role that only the CEO can really solve. There is product, there is technology, marketing, sales, all of that is important. But many times, founder CEO is not necessarily always thinking about the financial solvency of the company at any stage. And we had a company that was doing $150 million in revenue in India, and the CEO didn't really think through working capital issues. And when there was a telecom meltdown in India, 80% of his revenue was coming from telecom companies, and guess what? They stopped paying their suppliers, and they will eventually pay, obviously. But during that period, do you have access to capital from solvency? And if you don't, you could spiral down very, very quickly. So this can happen at any time. And this happened in 2000 when the financial meltdown happened in Wall Street. Companies with good ideas, good customers, good revenue still couldn't get funding anywhere. So it's not simply a question of Series A going into Series B. And having a healthy relationship where you have ideally at least 12 months of capital is important. But let me also take a different example.
Before you go to that, you made a very interesting point that that's primarily the CEO's job.
Yeah.
Typically, entrepreneurs raise money and then they start focusing on building the product and building the company and solving all the other problems, building the team and stuff like that. From what you just said, it seems that that entrepreneur, the CEO, should not take eye off the ball and continue to raise funds, or at least be in that mode all the time, so that when he needs it, that thing is available. Is that what you're saying?
Well, every day you're fundraising in one way or the other. Potential investors from corporate development groups, strategic options. From a business development, you're doing this every day, and you need to do this every day. And how much capital at any time do you need to raise is the magic question. You could raise too little and not have enough capital to get to the right milestones to get to next round of funding. You could have too much capital, and one would think that's a good problem to have, but it isn't because you have too much capital and you have to deploy it, and hence you start doing things that defocus you from the core business that probably had some merit. So I think that this notion, I hear this many times, entrepreneurs say, oh, I want to raise capital and never want to raise it again. I hate that. If you hate raising capital, you have only two options. Find somebody to run your business who likes raising capital, or who not likes, but who can raise capital, or be so profitable, your unit economics have to be so great that you don't need to raise capital. Even that may be a bit of a myth, but but nonetheless, so one of those two are the options. Otherwise, I think every day you're thinking about how do I build the bricks or put the bricks down for my business where I could tap into that as I need to when I need the capital.
So, Ali, you guys fund the first round. Have you seen those kind of things where you funded them, but you don't fund subsequent rounds to see of investment into the company? And what happens to those companies? You have funded, 70 companies so far? 70, yeah. And what can you describe to see what happened to them in terms of where all they went?
Yeah. So for the sectors that we invest in, I'm actually curious, how many people here are in either energy, financial inclusion, education, food and ag? Okay. So we did a review of the 150 sort of unicorn companies as defined by their evaluation, and only 15% were actually in those sectors. And there's a reason why, because those companies are really freaking hard to build and take a lot of time and a lot of different types of capital. And so what we see in our investments is the companies that are getting stuck are the ones who don't fit the sort of SaaS-based hockey stick growth model, because venture capital is probably actually not the only kind of financing that they should be pursuing, and they don't understand what's available to them. And that's for us like where the missing middle really is founders not understanding what types of really understanding the business, the milestones they need to reach, and the types of capital that are either available or that they need to sort of figure out how to get around before they even can get from that sort of seed round to a series.
All the companies you talked about, the kind of companies, they're all doing real stuff, not just software, right? They're doing real stuff. And real stuff takes money.
Yeah.
And real stuff does not scale overnight. It's not like you have 10,000 users today and 1 million users in 20 days. So that's why the problem is. How do some of the successful entrepreneurs, how have they solved the problem?
Some of the more successful entrepreneurs have solved the problem through finding alternative means of financing and being open to alternative investment structures. So something that we've piloted in the U.S. and one in Uganda is revenue share. So when we have sort of line of sight into consistent revenues from a company, we have made investments that essentially allow them to pay us back a certain percentage of revenue until they hit a certain threshold, or they can pay back the loan. It's essentially a loan. They can pay back the loan early. Not every company is interested in taking on that kind of financing. And so I think entrepreneurs need to be flexible again and sort of understanding what types of capital they could take on and what types of structures are out there. A lot of companies have used grant financing as a way to get past those issues as well, and those have been more successful.
So talking of real stuff, we have a panelist here who actually does real thing, and it's a family business. There are thousands of family businesses that are successful in a city or in a region, but they never get bigger. So what's the secret? I mean, how did, I guess even before you showed up on the scene, it was already a national thing, right? So what how did it break out of this more of a traditional family business confined to a city or a region?
So I think to get the real deal, you've got to speak to my dad or my grandfather. But I'll try and be a good proxy. If I had to put it down to one thing, it would probably be, I think, the work ethic and sort of the culture of the organization. So we've always been fairly fiscally conservative. And I see this with a lot of business families, especially business families that have endured. So my family business, and because it's a family business, there's no work-life balance, it's a work-life harmony. You talk about work at the dinner table, you talk about it in a lot of different ways, and so you almost get indoctrinated into it from an early age. And I had seen both the family and the fortunes of the family as well as the fortunes of the business kind of go through these cycles. So we had these very turbulent periods in the 70s, in the 90s. So I wasn't around in the 70s, but the 90s, I think, when the economy opened up, right? So that we went through a turbulent period, and then we had what we did not realize then was what was going to become a period of boom, right? And through it all, what I saw my father, who was 30 at the time, do was stay very focused on, this is a business that works, and I know how to make it work. I'm going to focus on operational excellence. This was the time when I think access to capital was almost non-existent, right? And even now, if you are a small-sized organization, banks will not give you a loan unless they get a personal guarantee from you. And so it's not access to capital. Yes, it exists, but there's a lot of buts and caveats to it, right? And that molded the way that we operated, which is work on, build a business, make it profitable, right? Always, so there's the saying which my CA used to tell me, and its revenue is vanity, profits are sanity, and cash flow is reality. And it's a funny saying, but that was what I think that was kind of the guiding principle. So we set up a store, we turn profitable as quickly as possible, and then we use the internal generation of funds to fuel further expansion. It's been 89 years, right? And there's been so many, there've been 5 generations. And even now the family has a very clear focus in, we only take out what we need for our needs, right? Which is, you do your annual family vacation, you have whatever the needs of the family are. And then the rest of it has to go back into the business. So it's almost a work ethic. There's another aspect to it, which is, how do you take that very strong core values and formalize it, right? And how do you ensure that the core values endure, right? What are the ways in which something that's that's in the founder's heads actually convert into actions and actually convert into demonstrated behaviors all through the levels? And those are things where I think there's a lot of literature on the topic, and when I guess the rest of the panelists can speak to it as well. But I think the genesis, even before we go into the practices and the tactics and the stuff that we do, fundamentally the mindset has to be, look, I'm the founder. There's nobody else. There's funding. There's all of this. The ecosystem can help me, or it can break me. There could be some exogenic shock. But in the end, it's me. It's my business. I'm fully invested into it, right? So I will do what it takes to make this sustain and to make this generate a livelihood for me and for my family. And I think if you have that, I think that's what I would probably speculate is the reason behind us enduring as long as we did.
So Harvard Business School and McKinsey could not have taught you all these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think they helped me articulate it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So why is this that, could you, now that you have this background, a little objectivity distance of being in business school and McKinsey and stuff like that, why is it that your family business was able to scale and others are stuck in the sort of the middle phases?
So there's a couple of things. One is actually unique to family businesses, and the fact is that it's a family business. I think your boss is your dad, is your boss is, it's complex. The good family businesses, or the ones that navigate these dynamics really well, are the ones that actually do rely on formal structures. And there are things like family charters, family constitutions. There are ways in which we say, okay, look, we're not going to be, because we all wear multiple hats, right? Sometimes I'm the manager, sometimes I'm the owner, right? And sometimes I'm your dad or I'm your sister, right? And then your father sort of shoots you down with something because you're also his daughter, and he comes in with all of that history. So I think the really good organizations have done a good job of understanding this, and as far as possible trying to compartmentalize that, where they keep the owners, or they sort of understand the role that you play as an owner and how that is distinct from the role that you play as a manager, someone who's actively managing the business, and how that's distinct from the role that you play as a family member. And I think going through those motions, having the kind of structures like a family charter, like a family constitution, these are the things that actually help you understand these dynamics in a way that you can articulate, and that you can also, and you can work the dynamics to your advantage.
That's very interesting. We'll get into a little bit more later, different aspects of it. But one question I want to ask the panelists is that, is there a pattern matching that they have, pattern recognition that they have developed in terms of the background or the educational accomplishment of the founder CEO? I mean, the fact that a person has an MBA or not, does that matter?
No. Short answer. I don't think MBA matters. I think even there's a mistaken notion. No, I was just going to go there. And in fact, we did and there's an article on LinkedIn, I think, that Kalari, that you can look up. But there is this notion that only IITs get venture capital funding, and that's actually not true. If you look at it, I think it's something like 58% or 60%. That's high, but it's not 98% of IITians get, or the only ones that have gotten funding across India. Of course, networks matter. Where do you find your co-founders and those networks? It's less about IIT than the networks that you might have formed that allows you to get your tech co-founder or this or that or whatever, or a McKinsey alumni network that is useful. Or so there are all of those kind of things that come, and power of networks is very high in building any kind of a business. But I think the educational background as deterministic of success, I think enough research has proven that that's not necessarily the case. I think at the end of the day, education is only tools, and entrepreneurs that succeed have something else, some kind of a, I won't call it as a mutated DNA or something like that, that allows them to look at life in a bit of a warped way. You have to be a little warped, okay, to be an entrepreneur.
Actually,
you agree?
100%. In fact, the reigning venture capital philosopher of Silicon Valley, Vinod Khosla, has a very interesting saying. He says, entrepreneurs are the ones who dare to dream and then are crazy enough to pursue that dream.
Yeah.
So you are absolutely right. I mean, it takes a special kind to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, you look at risk very differently. And I remember lots of my friends when I started my first company, where I had no salary for, I think, 18 months or something, and I took all my savings, which was $100,000 equivalent, and that was a lot. I was 27 or 28, so it was a lot of money, but I put all of that into my company, but I didn't see that as risk. I saw that as an opportunity, and somebody else might look at that as a risk. My God, my life savings, and I don't get a job, or I don't get a salary. You always get a job. But so I think that you look at risk very differently. You have to look at risk very differently, and only then I think entrepreneurs can go forward. And so, in terms of evaluating pattern recognition, if there is such a thing, you're looking for someone who is a combination of two things. First of all, they don't know what they don't know. I think that's very valuable. But it could also be the other side of the coin. They will never really be willing to know what they don't know. That's a danger, right? So it's a balance of, I don't know what I really said, if it sounded that good. So, but the summary of it is, there has to be a little bit of ignorance, because if you know too much, you're not going to try to do it. But if you're always ignorant and are never going to listen as you kind of go through this journey, I also think you get stunted. So it's finding that balance to be very confident, but yet having the potential to truly scale. So you're, looking for people that have ability to listen and scale, yet have a deep sense of self-confidence and purpose.
So talking of pattern recognition, you don't think that an education like MBA, gives you any advantage or an edge?
I don't have an MBA.
Okay.
Okay.
I just want to add
Yes.
something. Both on the MBA front. I'm also a believer that an MBA is great, but it is not an indicator of success for an entrepreneur.
No, that's not the question. The
But I
question is
would-
the other way around.
Okay. Oh, okay.
That if entrepreneur who has an MBA, is that person better equipped to handle those kind of challenges going forward?
So we've trained about 600 companies through all the programs that we've done since we were founded in 2009, and we actually did a survey last year of all of the companies that have been through our programs to try to understand what qualities actually correlated with success. So what
that's fascinating.
qualities did the founding teams have for the companies that were the most successful in raising future capital, in creating more jobs, and generating more revenue. And a couple of the things that we found. One was founding teams versus a solo founder, and I think that's pretty common knowledge at this point, that multiple founders is better generally, and of course there are always exceptions. The other was diversity, and particularly any team that had a female founder or co-founder was generally a significantly higher correlation with success. And I think that's just as much about diversity as it is about women. And since the theme of this Global Entrepreneurship Summit is about women, I think that's a really important point to make. Education was not something that was specifically identified or highly correlated with entrepreneur success in the cohorts that we ran. And then the last thing is lived experience with the problem. So whether it's the founder themselves or the team that they hire, and actually really understanding the problem that they're trying to solve being really important. I think way more important than an MBA.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah. I've read in Economist a while ago, actually on the September 23rd issue, that somebody did a controlled experiment in an island of Togo with 1,500 small businesses, and what they found was that the psychological training, such as setting goals, persistence, dealing with feedback, produced much better results than conventional business training in accounting, marketing, and HR. So people who have, like us, as you have been in venture capital, for us it's not a surprise. And that's exactly what she articulated earlier, that it's those other soft things that are far more critical than a formal education you see in accounting, HR, marketing, or any of these other things. So good. So we are in violent agreement here. What does the MBA say here?
But you don't have to withdraw from the MBA application if any of you were thinking of that.
Okay. All right, good.
You were asking for something.
We beat the subject to death about MBAs and stuff.
But she has an MBA.
That's why I was asking her. But
I think he's giving me an out.
But now we concluded that MBAs doesn't help. So now, in her own family's example, right? Your father doesn't have an MBA.
No, he does not. So
and your grandfather doesn't have an MBA.
No, but he is the hardest working person till date. And so he recently had, and I was telling the story to someone, he recently had the first surgery in his life. He's 78, so he had a gallbladder surgery. And so the doctor comes by after everything, and then he's walking him through it to say, okay, look, these are the things you need to watch out for, and you let me know, if you feel this discomfort, and these are the precautions you take. Any questions? And thought for a minute, and then he said, so I have to go to Varanasi on business this Saturday. And the doctor basically said, look, I haven't cleared you to walk down the flight of stairs, so you're not going to fly anytime soon. And I mean, that work ethic is not something you can gain in an institution. I think we've grown up, and whether it's a family business or it's in any other corporate, right? You grow up modeling the behaviors that you see embodied by your senior leaders. And these were the behaviors that I saw, where work and home life were always in harmony, right? And so it didn't feel that, oh, every time I'm at work, I'm actually away from home. I would see him get completely energized. He's 78, he works every day, he loves it, and he brings that energy into his home life, right? And so when you see that positive reinforcement, I think these are things where you don't get it in a textbook, right? And so the MBA gives you other valuable skills It makes you much more polished. It makes you, I think, the right kind of a institution and the education can actually make you a more self-aware individual, and you're more aware of your strengths, of your leadership abilities, of also the areas where you need to develop. But you can get it in any form and from any place, not just in an institution. I think all it does is it gives you a very accelerated sort of a training ground.
Okay, so let's talk about some other issue. You brought up the study of of the teams that become successful, and you brought up 3 points. One is that first of all, there is a team, a founding team rather than an individual. The second point you brought up was that domain knowledge. At least one founder is having a deep domain knowledge in the area of this thing. And what was the third one?
Gender diversity.
Oh, diversity.
Having a female founder.
Yeah, I mean diversity in general, not just female.
We specifically found gender diversity as a correlation. But
Silicon Valley will totally disagree with you.
I know. That's why only 3% of venture capital was women.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of diversity. Yes, I mean, but what Silicon Valley sees, is places a lot of value on the other two, which is a team and domain knowledge and stuff like that. But on the other hand, you see, I've seen cases being funded. There's one entrepreneur who got funded for taking on all this, this television monitor companies. They're large, big ones, very concentrated, like Samsung and Panasonic and stuff. They got funded, and I asked him. I talked to some of my friends who are experts in the display area, and they said they have zero chance of success because no startup has ever succeeded in this area. So I asked this entrepreneur, I said, why did you start in this area and how do you recruit your team members? So he said, one of the qualifications for recruit by joining my team is that if you have any domain knowledge, I will not hire you because then you have a bias, you see, about how things work. So I will not hire you. So that story is still incomplete. I don't know how, whether he will be successful in that philosophy or not. But the domain knowledge stuff, you see, does seem to make sense. Is this your approach also? Do you look for domain expertise?
I think it's not expertise as insight. Okay, sometimes somebody has a particular insight, either because they were a consumer and they didn't. So, for example, one of our companies, I'll just give an example, right? Ex-McKinsey, MBA type. I think he has an MBA. I have to verify, but definitely ex-McKinsey. Yeah, that's why I said type. Okay, so and he said, I and my wife bought this nice apartment, our first home. I was looking for furniture every weekend, spending on it, and didn't find anything in India. And I think anyone here would relate to that, and something that represented our identity, all of that. So I have started this online furniture company, and he didn't know next to nothing about furniture, right? But he identified a problem. He said, and I sat and talked to a lot of my friends, and you say furniture shopping, and they're like, oh, I would rather take the root canal or something, right? So, and they said, and he said, well, if so many people have this problem, I'm going to try and solve it, right? And I think he's done a very good job of building this company. But the insight there was he did work, and this is where his McKinsey background, I think, helped him to say, who's my target customer? This is this, young family who can afford in a metro a 3-bedroom apartment. And so he cased his user segmentation and defined that by how much are they willing to pay for a bed, right? And then that was his TG, target group. And then he brought experts to figure out furniture and blah, 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 blah. But that's an insight where he said, what do they look for? Clean lines. What is the average size of an apartment? So you're not making this for, the wrong kind of a setup. So I do think that it is a domain insight. It doesn't have to be a domain expertise. There are probably enough furniture wala, so to speak. That doesn't necessarily mean they will create a large enterprise. And that's a simple enough example to understand, and hence I used it. But usually from the founding team, there is some insight that isn't obvious. Once they explain, it's usually obvious. But it isn't so obvious why there is an opportunity. That's what I have found the clarity of thought. I'll give you another example. Most of the people here who are from India will know Myntra. Anybody shop from Myntra here? So when we, I know, but I'm just looking at how many are familiar with the brand, right? So and we Series A funded Myntra, right? And when we did that, there are two things actually. One about the funding that I want to explain, and second about the entrepreneurs' lack of domain knowledge. Okay, so explain both. When Mukesh came to us first, he was hesitant to ask for the capital that he needed, which is something that I see a lot when entrepreneurs come. He said, he was running out of money, and so somebody give me money, any money, right? So that's the mindset that you have. So he said, I'll take $2 million and that's all I need. And we did some work and we said, gosh, if we took $2 million or we gave him $2 million, we'd be shooting ourselves in the foot because we get through the temporary, but he will not be able to execute to a critical milestone to be able to prove one way or the other. You have to get to a milestone where you prove something. It's either failed or succeeded. You have to get there. It's the, halfway problem that is the issue, right? And we all relate to that. So he said he really needs 5, even though he's saying 2. But do we undercapitalize a company just because the entrepreneur in his vulnerability right now is willing to accept that, which is fair, right? If I'm in his shoes, let me get through today, then I'll worry about eating tomorrow, but let me just get through today, right? Well, what should you do from the other side? We went back to him and said, actually, we need to provide 5 and not 2, because if we undercapitalized your company, underfunded your company, nobody will be happy. Both of us will, have lots of issues down the road very, very soon. And so let's not get into that adversarial situation. So we, in fact, funded him $5 million, even though he was looking for 2 at that time, right? So that's one part of this, getting sufficient amount of funding to get to a certain milestone. I think that's very important.
So moral of the story is you need an enlightened investor who would think not just what you're asking for, but what you really need.
Not so much enlightened, because enlightened would mean that I'm doing you a favor, but
enlightened in self-interest.
Yeah, enlightened self-interest, absolutely, because I don't want to make it sound like I'm doing the entrepreneur
charity,
a favor.
Yes.
It's as much a favor to ourselves to not lose our money, and so that part. But the second part was, Mukesh didn't come from the fashion industry at all, right? And so he wanted to build this high fashion portal, and we are like, gosh, for whom? And he gave an example. He said, we will have things like Havaianas on the portal. I was like, what is that, right? And well, he was just using that as an example. Well, isn't Bata good enough for 300 rupees? You can get flip-flops, and these things are like $80 or something. Who in India is going to wear them? Well, if you go to a certain country club, maybe you wear it because others recognize it. Why does any of us wear, anything that is high-priced and not just functional, right? So that's fashion. So the point was, he saw a big need, right? Which necessarily I would not say we saw, right? I mean, I wouldn't say I was looking for an entrepreneur who was focused on building a fashion portal, but he stayed to that focus, right? He said, we want to be known for style and fashion advice, right? They're not the designers, but for providing that kind of a, portal. And the lesson out of that for me was to not second guess the entrepreneur too much also, right? And it wasn't domain knowledge, but it was an insight that India was ready for something like this. And a million other people could have thought this up. There is no secret sauce in this idea. So when sometimes I'll get an entrepreneur who wants time, and then some point I would have mistakenly agreed, and then they'll come and say, well, I won't tell you anything till you sign an NDA. And it would be better if they knew already that I will never sign an NDA, not just I mean any venture capitalist will not sign an NDA. So why waste any of our time? So to me, the point is about that insight of the idea And usually the insight, once you explain, is not a big deal.
Yes.
Or once it is succeeded, is not a big deal, but it's bringing all the pieces together. And a million other people in India could have done this, right? It's nothing great about the idea itself that it worked and is one of the largest fashion portals today in India and all of that. So when, for me, I look for a entrepreneur who has that clarity and deep conviction about the purpose that they are serving.
Okay, so we talked about the soft skills and all those things, that the unique insight. We talked about education. Let's talk about something different, which is product. The products that succeed, that manage to get subsequent rounds of funding and investments and success and stuff, do they have a particular characteristic? And the thing that comes to my mind is a long time ago, there was a book written called High Tech Marketing, and it was written by the guy who's introduced the Intel's microprocessor to the world. And when Intel's microprocessor was introduced to the world, it was a third or the fourth microprocessor. And the way he succeeded is he built this concept of full product around it. So it's not just a microprocessor, it was a whole bunch of the developer community, and it was all the connections to all the other things that microprocessor needed in order to be successful as a solution. And that actually explained Intel's phenomenal success against all the incumbents like Motorola and Zilog and all those things. So this concept of full product is a critical one. Now it's called full stack product. So when Uber comes out, any taxi company could have done what Uber has done, but nobody else thought about it. They thought of pieces of it, but nobody thought of the complete thing that Uber thought of. So I want to ask the panelists, this whole idea I see of the concept of product, and going back to the research that you guys did, was there any sense of the definition of the product? I mean, how complete it was. I mean, we talk about the minimum viable product to get to the market, but we also talk about does it completely address a particular problem? Do you guys have any, in your survey, did you guys look into that?
We didn't look at products specifically, largely because of the stage. Particularly in our earlier days, we're investing in even earlier stage companies. Now it's more about understanding where you need to take your product in order to get the capital that you need to build a product that's going to break through.
Okay. Lavanya, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, so in an inventory-based business, right, which is what we are, where you have a physical product, I think the product is king. And especially so speaking for our business, and we're in women's ethnic wear, merchandise is the backbone of the organization, right? So much so that what you spoke about, right, the full stack, the analogy that I can build is how have our business practices evolved to ensure that merchandise continues to stay the backbone and the competitive advantage that your business has. And in our situation, the way that we made it work is we're actually a little different than the way typical organizations at this scale or with this kind of a revenue would operate. So usually you see an organization that's hit 700 crores in revenue, and they've got their merchandising team, their buying team, they've centralized, because you need to centralize certain operations in order to be able to each function focus on its specialty, and then you move forward as an organization at the pace that you need to. But with us, because the merchandise is so critical, and also because India as a nation has, in this particular product, when it comes to women's ethnic wear, has such non-homogeneous tastes, and the kind of product that a woman in the South seeks is very different from the type of product and the kind of assortment that someone in the West or someone in a non-metro region seeks. We had to adapt and really localize our assortment. So how do you do that and still achieve scale? So we came up with this approach which is extreme sort of autonomy. It's an extreme decentralized model wherein the regional heads are kind of, chief of their kingdoms, right? So if you are a store manager, you are also the merchandiser. We have a zero discounting policy since 1940s, which was the first time when the industry shifted. This was 1940s when we shifted from a bargaining mentality to a fixed price mentality, and that was at that time supposedly, sort of ahead of the curve. And now you have a lot of people where you go on end of sale discounts, where a lot of people employ high-low strategy. Despite that, we've held on to a no discounting policy, and the only way you can do that, and the only way you can tell your store managers you have no way to liquidate your stock, is if you empower them to say, fine, you choose your stock. You pick the stock, where this is how all of our other stores run. This is the operational efficiency that we have. These are their performance metrics. This is how quickly our inventory turns, right? And we don't have central warehousing. So you've got to have just-in-time inventory. You have no recourse to liquidate your stock. And if you work almost as an autonomous sort of chief of your kingdom, you don't have the concept of stock transfers to say, hey, I made a mistake and I transfer my stock, right? Why is the other SVP going to listen to it? So if you take all of those levers away from them, then you've got to give them something else, right? And what we did was we kind of empowered them to say, fine, then you choose, completely the assortment is in your control. So I think for a lot of businesses that are inventory based, right? I would say product and consumer. These two are very, very interlinked because you need to really know your consumer and know what they want in the product. And then you've got to be able to deliver it to them. So you've got to be able to get the product to them in the most efficient, fastest, the best way possible. So all your business practices have to kind of come together to make that happen.
Fascinating. And it's very, very revealing. Any insight into the product, the full stack product versus this thing, its bearing on the success of the company?
So maybe I'd like to use that question and opportunity to not talk from the conventional kind of businesses that we fund, which is tech companies, and hence product typically talks about features, UI, UX, and blah, blah, blah. But product could also be a brand or an experience, right? And that's product too. And I want to use that thought to give an example. But how many of you have shopped at a Nalli before? Of course, if you're from South India, you would have definitely done that. But the example, because I have Lavanya here, I'll tell you, is when my daughter, and I think you've met Tara, but when she was doing her Arangetram, for those that don't know what that is, that's a solo dance debut after you have learned to dance for a number of years that you do. And when she was doing that, right, by and large, generally you go to a Nalli to buy the sari that then gets made into a dress, right? And now if you try to break that apart, why? You could go anywhere, you could buy any sari, and I don't think anybody would really know that, but there is somewhere that branding that's created, and you buy a Kanchivaram sari. Even within that, right? But why a Kanchivaram sari? Any other sari is just as good enough, but it's a ritual and it's a brand, it's an experience of what you want, what you feel, not what the audience, even when you are performing, feel, what you feel as a dancer, why you do that, right? So we went to Mylapore, and we don't even live in Chennai, and we live in Bangalore. You trek all the way to Mylapore, and there's a Nalli not too far from my house. We could go there, but you went to Mylapore, and we went to their store and bought this, and all the tailors for this are in Mylapore. That's why you go there to buy. But that's more than you or anyone needed to know about dance or how you buy a sari or something. But I'm just saying
I didn't even know that you had that older daughter.
Oh, please. Okay, that's Venk being a great guy and all of that. But two daughters, 23 and 19. But in any case, so but it's an experience. It's a brand. So a product could also be that, and in your the relationship that the consumer has to that experience you could offer, and to that product, and how they interrelate to that. And I think that's the harder thing to create, the brand and the experience as a defining part of the product. That is harder to create, because sari is available everywhere. So what is different, right? But I think that's applicable across the board. If it's Uber, even being able to rate the driver, or the driver being able to rate you and blacklist you, even that, right? So
that's what is a complete product
yeah,
missing, right?
but the experience part usually is less thought about. The features part of it is more thought about. That's really the point I wanted to make.
Right. Another related part of the product is what I call, a redwood tree versus a banyan tree kind of experience. And I've seen this in India. I don't know in other countries how does it work, but lots of startups that I've seen in India, they try to do something. There's something they are good at, but they also end up doing a whole lot of other things because they went to the customer and the customer said, can you do this also? I like this, but can you do this also? And can you do this also? And either it's because of the fear of failure, or is it cultural, or whatever. And people said, sure, I'll keep doing this. And then then they come to Silicon Valley and we look at it. And I said, why do you do this, and this? I mean, none of those. Hundreds of people, other companies can do this. Why are you wasting your time on this thing? And they say that, well, and the customer was paying money for it, and customer, it was a very important customer. I didn't want to lose the customer, so we added these features and this feature and that feature. So that is, when you do that thing, especially when you want to go in a competitive industry, especially when you want to go outside scale, that becomes a big issue. So this is, and case after case, you have seen that a redwood tree, which is thin and tall, succeeds, versus a banyan tree which is horizontal to see and doesn't go very far, doesn't go very high. So, so I was wondering if there is a perspective, from Ellie, you on that thing. And I keep coming back to the product because product is a very, very important part of success of a startup. Not just the attributes of the founder, not just attributes of the enlightened self-interest investor, but other things also. So, have you seen that kind of thing? That fundamentally, people see either doing too much of a product or not doing enough of it.
Yeah. Well, again, I think what we see based on the company, the stage and sectors that they're operating in is whatever they think their product is going to look like over the long term is completely wrong when they come into our program. So we don't spend, I think there are accelerators that specialize in product development and helping companies define their product strategy and their roadmap. We don't spend a ton of time with companies on that because we think there are sort of some fundamentals that got to get before they even get to that point, knowing that they're going to consider it very significantly when you're working in either in sectors that are where you're solving a particularly challenging problem, like you're going to have to do more iteration on the product, or when you're operating in an environment like in East Africa and the agriculture space, you're probably going to have to take on a lot more than you thought you were going to. So you might start off with a software-based product and then realize you've got to actually acquire some assets in the supply chain that are more hard assets, and your company starts to look very different, the product that starts to look very different. So, but I think we have a unique perspective for focus on this particular type of company and this company.
Right. Any idea on that?
I think both models work. If you think of Google, very quickly they get to be a banyan tree. They're everywhere, right? It's not just about a specialized search engine.
But they didn't start out that way.
No, they didn't start out that way. But I'm just saying they spread out.
Once you have money,
yeah,
and you have a steady stream of money
sure,
that nobody can touch.
But there were other search engines who had money.
Then you can indulge in all the other things.
No, I know. So I agree. But if we just think about that from bias that I think we do have as venture capitalists, that is, we want to focus, which is important. Because day one, if you want to be everything, you can't. But what should you do, day 2, day 3, day 4? But, yesterday, John Chambers was there, and if I observe, the companies that were rulers in that era you know this thing so well, Telecom, Novell, Norton, whatever, they were all gone. Cisco is there because they kind of expanded into other areas by self-inventing themselves. So there is a process of self-inventing. How fast, how quick is defined by the industry and defined by your vision, right? Some stay very deep, very narrow, very, domain centric, and that's fine. You could be like a nuance, let us say, and you're very much into, voice, and you are it for it, and that's okay. A lot of this is leadership led, I feel, and that's all right. But there may be other businesses where, because where the industry is moving, or where your competences as an organization takes you, you get into a lot of different things. Obviously, if you get into a lot of different things and do all of them badly, it doesn't work. You have to own the markets, and how do you create an institutional culture to own that market is a different topic by itself. But I think both could succeed, at least from my opinion. It's a question of, what is driving that entrepreneur to go either very deep because of a deep domain knowledge or a deep passion or something, or what is driving that entrepreneur to think that they need to expand the business, and what is at the core of that expansion. And if it is simply because, I have too much funding, wrong reason, or, I just want to feel like a king, but you're not a king. So, so you can't just go and say, I'll be doing all the businesses.
This is the vanity
right?
vanity thing that you talked about.
Yeah, this is the vanity thing.
Not the sanity thing.
Yeah, so I think that to me at least both work, and I at least don't have a bias. You should be one or the other.
Okay, all right. Well, I think enough of this thing from our side. Open for questions, and please tell us who you are, and then tell your question. Wait till the mic.
My name is Rahma Rai. I'm the founder of a beauty business that works with women in northern Ghana. And I'm really interested to hear how you define the missing middle from each of your sectors. Is it a certain revenue? Is it break even? Because when we hear startup, seed, we all tend to know what that means, pre-revenue. But what does the missing middle mean? And then the second part of my question is if you could give us one resource to help us figure out, based on how you define it, like what are some of the resources we can use to kind of address that missing middle gap? Thank you.
Is it important for you to know what missing middle means? Because otherwise, if you have if you have real questions in your business, why don't you ask that question, and the experts here will answer that.
No, I don't. I just want to understand it from your perspective, because it sounds like you are working with individuals to help them get ready for funding. You're working with companies that have already reached a certain level of revenue. So I'm just trying to figure out what that.
I think to me it just means wherever somebody has plateaued, let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And how do they rekindle from that point to move forward? So there isn't one resource, because it depends on why you have plateaued, and then how do you go forward from there. And that to me is the missing middle, so you have some success and you kind of are stuck there, and you need to get to another place, and then maybe you can take off again. How do you cross that chasm?
So I can offer a resource to your second question, and what is often referred to as the missing middle has been defined by the Omidyar Network, and it is specifically looking at companies who are essentially in between seed stage and sort of that high growth stage, and really there's not a lot of financing available, particularly in markets like sub-Saharan Africa, so that'd be an interesting resource for you to look at, where there's not really grant financing available because you're a little bit too big. There's not sort of like growth capital, you're not quite ready for it, so what does that sort of mezzanine level look like? That's how they define it, and I would recommend taking a look at what they've done.
We to say that we start with the concept from the home, our friends. Then we'll go to bank, we'll have little more comfort. Then we'll stop there. That's the situation of every MSME companies in India.
That's a good definition right there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other question? You have the mic. Okay. He has the mic.
So recently, I heard that in this connected world, we as entrepreneurs, we ought to be able to find capital where it is available and get it. Does it really work that way? Is capital really available that way? Means, of course, there are VCs in India, right? That part I understand. But if the VCs, do VCs out of India invest in companies who are existent in India? Means start phase. I'm not speaking of already they have got funding and all that. How does
So help me
Questions to you.
help me break down your question, right? One question was, do VCs outside of India invest in India? Is that the question? Okay. So I can answer that, and she can also answer that. In terms of the source of money, it turns out until about 2 years ago, 90%, 95% of the capital that was invested in India came from outside India. People in India did not put money.
I mean companies, investors who are not present in India. So
Yeah.
Sequoia is present in US, they also have a base
Yes,
in India. I'm
yes.
not speaking about them. So
Yes.
Sequoia has a presence in
Yeah,
India.
yeah.
The money might be there, but,
Sure.
but the VC is here, right?
Sure.
I'm speaking about VCs who are not here. Does it really work that way? So
It's very, all the VCs make decision based on, some of the things that she talked about is understanding the unique insight and the conviction and the composition of the team. You can't do that, unless you spend time with them. And if you are sitting in Silicon Valley, it's very hard to do that. Angel investors, on the other hand, do put money in. And they put money in based on who else is putting money in, or if they know the entrepreneur, or if they know, or if that area is appeals to their passion. But in general, organized VC funding, organized VCs don't invest in startups here unless they have a local presence here.
Well, let's move on beyond that question,
Yeah,
right? So
let's
others
just move
have
on. But she has
I
a
think she
question.
had a
Second row, yes.
Hi, I'm Vasa from Greece. I've been involved with startups for the past 6 years, did some fundraising as well. And I want to ask a question one step before the fundraising about the research you did. You said one founder is usually not enough, but is there an upper limit that you found that's way too many? Because from my experience, maybe 2 are too many.
Yeah, we didn't have a magic number, so this is probably more anecdotal. My response is more anecdotal, that 2 to 3 is probably the right size. I think I was thinking of the story you told us before the panel about the 2 founders, that the inherent risk of a company
Yes.
is like, to your point, 2 founders might decide they don't like each other and they don't want to work together anymore. And so obviously there are always exceptions. We have funded companies that have had more than 3 co-founders, but that's a really delicate mix of really identifying what the roles of the founders or co-founders are, and some become passive participants in the company.
2 to 3 is ideal. Speaking as a VC, 2 to 3 is ideal. When it gets to 4 and 5, is guaranteed to become dysfunctional in the future.
But can I answer something to that on the co-founder stuff? What is important to me is less about whether they are 2 to 3 or 4 to 5, whether the roles and responsibilities are very clearly defined or not. Sometimes what you have is, we are 4 friends, we have been there since first grade or whatever, and I ask one question, who's the CEO? And they haven't yet decided. And that's
a danger sign.
That's a danger sign. They say, but we are all equal, we'll do whatever is needed. Wrong answer. Because if all of you can't agree, then who gets to cast the veto on what should be done? We don't work that way. What are you going to do? How long are you going to keep talking to find consensus? So this is not democracy. Building a company is not exactly democracy. So there has to be between, and it's very hard, especially if you are, we knew each other since we are in grade 3. There's too much history there, and you don't have family constitution or friends constitution yet, but you're all equal. But then how does one step up to be the one that makes the decision? So co-founders is important, but if their roles are not clear, it's a problem. And second one, quickly, one situation where this founder came to us, great idea. We also funded the company, but he had a unique situation he brought to us where all of them had equal number of shares. And in hindsight, I probably wouldn't do that situation again. But I said, why? I asked him why. He said, because I just don't want, I want everyone to feel equal. And I told him, what happens when tomorrow you feel like you did more and, and you gave away the company to people who didn't do enough? If you feel that as a CEO, then what will you do? He said, oh, I'm not that kind of a person. It's easy to say these things. And, I just want everyone to feel equal in my company. That's all okay because your company is not worth anything today. And, it's very easy to be magnanimous when you have nothing, right? But they ran into so many problems. And it's problems we couldn't solve. And also if you make a decision and a choice to make peace with it in your head, and the CEO later never made peace, and he wanted us to resolve that problem. It's not resolvable. It's a cap table. You've already given away your shares. And they got into so much interdynamics where you don't deserve this, but it's in his pocket. You cannot take it away whether you think he deserves it or not. And so much energy got sucked in. So I also don't like founders having equal shares of the company. I want people, before they come to us, to sort out all these dynamics and,
it's like when 3-4 dogs get together, you see,
Yeah.
they quickly figure out who is the alpha dog,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So they need to figure out who the alpha dog is. And I'm entirely with you. I just refuse to fund a company because 4 or 5 of them said, oh, we'll all be equal. And I said, once you figure out, you see who's taking the most stress.
Yeah.
And deserves to be compensated the best. And when you figure it out, come back to me.
And the worst thing is they come for a fundraising pitch and they think everybody should have one slide each that they talk to. And,
That's a sign of trouble.
Yeah, that's a sign of trouble because they say we are equal, so we need to. It's like Pandavas or something. Right? So it doesn't.
Anyway,
Sorry,
go ahead.
So slightly different perspective, but on that, right?
Well, at least we're having fun here.
Yeah.
So speaking at it from the angle of like high-performing teams, right? I think it's less about the number when I look at it from in that light. It's more about the chemistry and the deep respect that you have. Now, you can't have decision-making by committee, right? So deep respect doesn't mean that I am not going to raise a provocative question. In fact, the very opposite. Because you respect the person so much, you figure out effective ways to resolve conflict and you will go headlong into it and you will resolve it. Now, whether it is 1 sibling, 2 siblings, cousin, right, father, whatever it is, right, or friends, I think that has to be in place. Whether it's a team level, it's at the founder level, at whatever position it is, you need to be able to speak to the people who are very important decision makers, but intrinsically you all know that there is a deep regard that we have for each other and how we resolve disagreements when they come up and how we still continue forward with a unified focus.
So we have time for 2 more questions, and okay, let's have some diversity here from Africa. I assume that you are from Africa.
Hi, I'm Nicole Youngbrook. I'm originally from the US, but I do live in Nigeria.
Okay, there you go. Okay.
So I'm CFO and partner for a fintech company, and we were successful enough to be able to skip VC stage and we raised $20 million from PE. But we also then realized that we needed other people to build products on our platform. So we started saying, okay, well, we'll fund a little bit of this, and we actually have a company that went through Village Capital in Nigeria, and so we started, giving them money. But then we're like, okay, what happens now? I can't deploy all of my capital that I've raised to help you grow your product because I need your product to sit on my platform. So we formalized the fund early last year, started helping bridge this gap of this $250,000.
So do you have a question?
Getting to it, $250,000 to $2 million, but there's not that many people doing it. So there's not a lot of businesses in Nigeria and across sub-Saharan Africa that are scaling. If you're looking at what our population is, if you're looking at #1 economy in Africa, all of this, like this gap is still there. You mentioned that in India, 90% of funding is coming international sources. Like, what do startups in this gap in Nigeria, what should they do, or fund of funds to be able to kind of deploy this capital? Like, what should they do? Is it government? Is it because of policy, what needs to happen to kind of bring in more of that money, because there's brilliant people, entrepreneurial spirit, but they just don't have the money to be able to scale that business.
Let's ask Ellie. I mean, how some of the entrepreneurs have solved the problem in Africa?
Yeah, well, most of our missing middle challenged entrepreneurs are in Africa and facing exactly what you just described. And I'll be interested to hear who it is that went through our program that you have helped. But one of the things I think is really interesting, and I'd be curious for the perspective of India, is you have to start building the local capital. At the end of the day, I think sub-Saharan Africa is overly reliant on external, like a lot of DFIs and a lot of foreign capital coming in, particularly from the philanthropic sector, that doesn't necessarily, it isn't catalyzing for some reason, not catalyzing local capital, it's not catalyzing people to put in the more risky capital locally, and at the end of the day, if you look at Silicon Valley, right, Silicon Valley is successful because people there reinvested in companies.
I have a solution for you, actually. I do have a solution.
Yeah.
Have you heard of this organization called TIE? So TIE, I used to be chairman of TIE Global. So one of the things that TIE does is, once you have a chapter, to set up a chapter, you need at least 15 very, very successful people to do that. And once they get together, I'll just turn it off. So once they get together and they start talking about entrepreneurship and stuff like that, it's not a whole lot of time before they start investing in local companies. We started a chapter in a state which is, by all measurements, please don't take offense, anyone here, by all, this thing used to be considered backward state, and we started a chapter in Bhubaneswar, Bhubaneswar, Odisha, and there are two companies that were funded, seeded locally, and they are doing incredibly well. And so one of them is just raised funding, he had $50 million valuation, and it all was seeded initially by local people. And one of them operates 2-3 hotels, another operates a transport company. They're not in technology, not in this business at all, but the fact that they were part of this TIE group and they interacted with entrepreneurs and mentored them over a period of time, it's only a matter of time before they get tempted or before they fall in love with some idea or some entrepreneur and they fund them. So long term, the only solution is local capital. And we can talk more about it, I think, about this TIE chapter thing. It's not a short-term thing, it's a long-term solution. Okay, one more question.
We are done.
We are done? No, one more question. Okay, sure, go ahead.
So, my name is Padma Sri. I'm into Mudra Flexible Printers. I'm into printing business. So, my question is, in India particularly, when venture capital comes or any capital comes, they don't give to manufacturing facility. Why so? We are into manufacturing, and nobody's interested in manufacturing units. Why so? That's my question.
I don't know if I would make that blanket statement that people don't do. In general, VCs have a bias for what they call cash efficient business, right? Which means anything that does not involve real stuff, right? So that bias is there, yes. But I know of situations where people have invested in this manufacturing kind of thing. This.
See, I think most businesses should not be funded by venture capitalists. I don't know why there is so much fascination for venture capital funding. Don't take money from venture capitalists. That's my first advice. Okay. So, and no, but and I'm not trying to be fictitious about it, because there are many kind of businesses to build, and your life is probably far better off not trying to take venture capital funding unless.
Would you like to have someone like her on your board for
Yeah, seriously, every month do you want to send me reports, MIS, corporate governance, all, and I'm going to say, where is your 1,000 retail point in 1,000 days, right? And do you want to really do that? Probably not. So, so I think there's a time to take venture capital. There are very few businesses, very narrow type of businesses that benefit from venture capital, because it's very high risk capital, but it only makes sense when there is a probability of exponential growth. And exponential growth typically cannot happen in a manufacturing kind of a situation. But I'll give you a different example. This is one situation where an MBA helped. One of our here in Hyderabad there is a pharmacy chain called MedPlus, and we were Series A investors there, not because we knew anything about pharmacy and we don't like retail, but it was actually his Harvard MBA class project, and he was a doctor who didn't want to practice medicine and went to Harvard to get an MBA to do something else, because if you're a medical license and you don't want to practice medicine, then you do need to get an MBA to figure out what to do. And but he said a very interesting thing, a hub and spoke model with a very efficient supply chain on a very small footprint, 500 square foot footprint, where he could stock 5,000 SKUs with doing inventory replenishments 3 times a day, because he had put the technology to know more flu medicine is going here, so I need to replenish that, you know, and kind of just change the conventional way of how stocking happened. He changed that, you know, on its head, and hence had better margin profile and so on and so forth. And what was fascinating was, obviously, if he could open, anybody would say, I have a mom and pop pharmacy and venture capitalists are not funding me, which typically they won't, right? But what he did is, in 4 years, I think when we met him, he had 4 pharmacies, and in 4 years, I think he had like 1,500 or 1,600 pharmacies. It would have been impossible without that kind of a hub and spoke and technology and blah, blah, blah that you put in. But let me, no, I know, but hold on a second. So, but I think the problem is that kind of scaling could warrant venture capital, but otherwise, you know, venture capital is really a pain in your neck. So
Mediclus for the high interest, we are supplying pouches to them also.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
But
my product is having 80% of growth, and when I started in 2005.
But you know, so here's the point. I think the fundamental point she made, which I'm in agreement with, is if it's really having that kind of a growth, venture capital is not the answer. There are other forms of capital that are available. We'll talk about it. I think that are available, that are willing to fund that kind of an expansion.
Yeah.
Because now it is a cash-based kind of a business,
Yeah.
right? There are alternative channels of investments available for that. So anyway, you know, we had a lot of fun. So thank you very much for